Hello and welcome to SwitzerTV Property. I'm Peter Switzer. We go out on Thursday, of course, and I welcome you to the program. On tonight's show, I've cornered the founder of Century 21, Charles Tarby, who was not a great fan of the boom that happened until about 2016 and early 17. He was happy that the market went off the boil. I guess he got a bit worried when it started looking worse and worse and worse until, I guess, the May election of 2019. But now he's actually quite comfortable of what he sees, and he goes around the country naming the suburbs that he thinks are really hot. And then we'll catch up with Ben Kingsley from the Property Couch podcast and suburbgrowth.com.au, and we'll talk about how the market is actually developing and the first home buyer scheme that's likely to start in January and February, and we'll work out what kind of impact this will have on the property market. So without any further ado, let's go to the founder of Century 21 here in Australia and New Zealand, Charles Tarby. Well, one controversy at the moment in the property sector is, are house prices really rising? Is the housing sector really rebounding? Well, if you read the Financial Review or the Australian or the Sydney Morning Herald or the Age, they're all saying, yes, it is, but there are some people out there saying, don't trust the numbers. So I thought I might talk to a guy who's got a hell of a lot of branches when it comes to real estate agencies, and that's Charles Tarby, the founder of Century 21. Thanks for coming on the program, mate.
Peter.
Is it Century 21 or is it CU something? When I talk to you, you use that term.
Me?
Yeah.
What do I use?
C21.
Oh, C21.
C21.
Well, it's easier because people keep saying, what are you going to do at Century 22? And I say, I don't really care. So, C21's the new thing.
It's really cool.
It's a new seal as well, as you see around the tracks.
I was trying to make a point of that.
Yeah, I think.
Why did you do that for?
I didn't. Yeah. I didn't. The American part of the arm decided it was a good time to...
C21.
Yeah. So we all looked at it and thought, wow, it looks great. So
imagine a big basketball commentator saying, 2-1.
Yeah, okay.
And you come out.
What are we here for?
We're here to entertain the crowd because deep down they want to know, can you believe this house price recovery?
Yeah, you can, because we had a massive drop very, very quickly. Really quickly, and I think...
And you wanted it. You actually said in 2016...
Too much. Way too much.
Yeah.
It needs to stop.
So you're not a spruiker.
And it didn't stop.
No.
And then they reduced interest rates, and off it went again. You know, and so it needed that correction. It has had a good correction, and the one thing that's stabilising it is stabilising the prices from going crazy, because the clearance rates are out of this world. Are the banks. The banks are still steady with their lending. And I guess the steadier they're lending, the harder it is for people to get into the market. So you don't have that crazy feel of a boom, which most real estate operators don't like. A boom is a massive disruption.
Okay. So another thing that I figured has helped prices go up is that there's been reports that there's a supply problem. Is that right? And B, is it changing? Is it improving?
Yeah, it has been an issue, but a lot of people are now, a lot of vendors are now thinking, those that held off, thinking, okay, it might be time. And so it's slowly but surely the stock levels are increasing across the last 4 or 5 weeks. We're watching the stock levels increase. So that is definitely happening, which is great because it's curbing the buyer enthusiasm in addition to what the banks are doing. So I think we have a really nice marketplace right now where somebody who wants to sell can sell, somebody wants to buy might have to compete a little bit. But
they call that equilibrium economics.
I don't know the words. I'm a real estate agent from Penrith, Peter. What do I know?
Yeah, but you come good.
Biggest word I know is delicatessen, and I can't spell it.
That's a tough word to spell. All right, so supply's starting to improve. Let's just go around Sydney first, because you are a Sydney-based guy, but you've got agencies right around the country. One of the things that shocked me during the boom was when someone said, the median house price in the western suburbs of Sydney is now $1 million. Is it still $1 million?
Well, it's dropped back and it's starting to creep back up there again. Generally, again, due to the lack of stock. But as more stock comes in, it'll stabilise the prices. So I don't think we're going to have massive price rises. As long as the listings start coming back onto the market again, we're going to have that equilibrium that you were talking about.
Yeah, exactly right. You see, you've learnt something working with me. You are a quick learner.
Yes.
You guys from Crookwell, you're always fast learners.
To potatoes.
You and John Simon, both from Crookwell.
Yeah.
Heard that here first.
He was born there. Yes, he was born there, John.
Was he really?
Yes, he was, yeah.
Where were you born?
I was born in Sydney, but Mum and Dad moved out there because they heard the country towns were prospering.
Okay.
Unbeknown to me, they used to hang out with the Simon family because John's considerably older than me, don't tell
Yeah,
him.
no, you're a very young man.
Yeah, so I was very young when he left the town. I think he left the town when he was only a baby. So can you imagine that?
But what did your parents do?
They had a ladies' fashion shop,
Did
believe
they?
that. But they
And
knew
John's
nothing
parents had
about
fruit
it.
shop.
There you are.
Yeah.
They knew nothing about it, but
Yeah.
they thought that's what you had to do to progress.
Yeah.
And so naturally everybody in my family went into business. It was really bizarre.
Okay.
Every sibling
Yeah.
went into business, I think, as an example that my parents set.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, let's get back to
Yeah.
what you're really here for. And people are interested in these.
Yeah.
And one day we're actually going to do a story about how you actually got Century 21.
Okay,
Because
sure. It
you
is
were,
an interesting
as you
story.
pointed out, you're a real estate
agent from Penrith.
plonker
Yes,
from Penrith,
I was.
but a very a person with high aspirations, and you've done fantastically well. But we'll save that for another day.
Thank you.
All right. Further interest rate cuts, do you think that will power more people into looking for houses?
No, I think they're already comfortable with the rates that we have now. I think they're far more comfortable. I was going through some old records the other night. I've got my diaries going back since 1978 that for whatever reason I kept. And I was going through some old records about the home that I live in, which I purchased back in the mid-80s.
Gee.
And I'm still living in the same place.
Fantastic couple of going on that one.
Yeah, still living in the same place. And I was looking over some of the old files, just history files, and I saw a letter from the wonderful Beneficial Finance at that time.
God.
And it said that...
Who owned that?
Well, State Bank of SA, I think it was at the time.
Right, okay.
And it said your interest rate is 22.75%, but if paid on time, 18.75%. I was looking at that and I go, wow. I mean, and you think today, interest rate's 3-4%. I think people are comfortable with rates. I think it's a matter now of can they get the money because of the different lending criteria that's changed, not just around people but around suburbs and cities. Banks won't lend in certain locations or on certain types of properties, whether it's community title or strata or a company title. They've changed. So I think we've got that's balancing it out. But I think people are very comfortable with the interest rates. If they dropped any more, I don't think it'd have any impact at all.
Yeah, some people think that it might actually worry people, thinking that the economy is so bad
I
that it has
think
to
it would
go
worry me
to
too.
emergency rates. Let's go around the country.
Yeah.
Both Perth and Brisbane have struggled for some time.
They
And I think you've told me in the past you're starting to see some improvement in Perth.
Very much, yeah.
Is it becoming real now?
It's becoming real in those areas. The clearance rates, especially in Brisbane, have sometimes tipped into the 50s, which is very rare for Brisbane, same as with Perth. There are just areas in Perth that have dropped so much in price that they were dropping before, while the boom was still happening in other capital cities. Yeah. So I think if you go into those areas, you'll find, somebody asked me to pick 5 suburbs across Australia, and I picked Mandurah because if you look at Mandurah...
That was so popular before the boom collapsed.
And it's getting closer and closer to Perth with the infrastructure, and you've got these beautiful multi-million-dollar canal homes that are not as multi-million-dollar as they used to be.
And the beaches are good there too, huh?
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So places like that are really starting to offer people opportunity now.
Okay, that's Mandurah. I'm going to make you give me those 5 suburbs. I hope you can remember them.
Yeah.
Well, you don't drink much, so you must remember.
No, I'll give it a go.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, well, I picked in South Australia, I picked Glenelg, again because the beautiful beach suburb, restaurants, the whole thing, and to the city of Adelaide is a very short trip. Again, you can still buy some magnificent homes at great prices within walking distance to stunning beaches. So you can't get that in too many places. And South Australia as a whole has offered that, going all the way down the coast to Carrickalinga and places like that, where you can get beautiful homes with ocean views.
Yeah, I guess if a person could get themselves a good job in Adelaide, leaving, say, Sydney or Melbourne, they could really upgrade their homes pretty easily, couldn't they?
They could, yeah.
Okay, that's South Australia.
Well, I hope that was South Australia. I hope people don't get upset with me. They didn't ask me, I only asked for 5, so I didn't get to Darwin or Tassie. So I did the 5 major cities. Victoria, I picked Frankston. Now, a lot of people think, well, Frankston's one of those places where there's a lot of rental properties, a lower income.
It's sort of like the cheapest area going into the Mornington Peninsula, isn't it?
Yeah, and it goes from one of the cheapest areas to one of the most expensive areas within the same location. Yeah. And so again, for me, it represents, these all seem to be on the coast, don't they?
Yeah.
And I don't like the beach.
Because you're a mountain
You can
man,
still get sand between your toes 3 months later.
Yeah.
But I think that area, again, the infrastructure's improving. I mean, I don't like that trip from Melbourne down Nepean Highway down to Frankston. It's a struggle sometimes, but it's getting better and better. And I think because it's close proximity to the peninsula, the water and so on, I think it's good value.
Okay,
very
so
good value.
let's go to Sydney now.
Yeah, well, Sydney market is one that I've tossed up quite a few times because I keep changing my mind with the Sydney market because there are so many spots that you can pick, and the one that I've always picked has been the Hebersham, Mount Druitt.
Around Eastern Creek,
always picked those areas.
Around if you always says good value as well.
Because you've got the M4 and the M7, and you've got areas just above you that in north and south where there are $1 million homes being sold left, right and centre.
Yeah.
So
and
I've always
these
picked
suburbs
those
are
sorts of
cheap,
areas.
aren't they, the ones you're talking
They're very
about?
easy to get into in terms of price.
And there's a lot of hobby farms in that area as well, or are they going?
A lot of them are gone, but there's a lot of the developers have gone out and optioned a lot of stock out there. People are sitting on a potential
So
fortune.
just name those suburbs again for those people in Sydney who might not know.
I was talking about Hebersham, Darrack, those areas just past Mount Druitt. That strip in there, in my view, has got a lot of potential.
Okay, let's go into Queensland.
Queensland, I picked another coastal area, in fact. I picked Redcliffe.
Yeah.
I like that area because, again, it's not far from Brisbane. You've got the infrastructure going up that way, up through North Lakes all the way up. And you've got beachside, you've got holiday areas, but you can get into the car and be down at Brisbane Airport or in Brisbane very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So you can have quality lifestyle in a quality surrounding without being encompassed by the city, but you're not far from the city.
Are there tiger sharks swimming around in Redcliffe?
Within my industry? In my industry?
You said that, not me.
We're always called that. So,
No, all right. Well, at least not wimpy sharks.
No,
tiger shark.
No.
All right, so that's around the country.
Yeah.
A lot of people would like to hear your views on apartments because we're always told that Melbourne had a gross oversupply of apartments in the
same as Brisbane area, West End area.
Yeah. So it was South Bank area and South Bank area in Brisbane as well. Yeah. And Sydney, does Sydney have an oversupply?
Sydney, yeah, it does in some parts, and there are some developments out there that are sitting there with cranes ready to go.
Yeah.
Ready to go.
Right.
Because the developers need to obviously still sell a percentage of those apartments before the banks are going to talk to them. That's still a given in most cases. And so those sales are not happening. They're not happening as quickly because there's a lot of talk around apartments off the plan. There's a lot of talk about the Homebush area and south of Sydney area where the apartments are having trouble.
Like
and
cracks and cladding.
People are focused on that. There's a lot of quality builders out there and a lot of quality apartments, but people are focused on just a couple of those.
If the apartment blocks are, say, 3 or 4 levels high, are they being treated with more or less fear than the towering infernos?
Yes, absolutely. I saw a development the other day that's with the Century 21 Castle Hill guys, and it's just 300 metres from the new metro station in Castle Hill.
Location.
It's in a quiet street, and there are still residential houses around it. And it's like a 5 or 6 storey building and about 80 odd apartments. I should know more about it. I did look at it before I went away recently. And that's an area I'd buy in because you've still got the housing around you, you've got the railway station down the road, it's still a relatively quiet area, and that's the sort of complex that's not over the top that I would buy in.
Are we going to see, once, I guess, the private certifier issue is sorted out and buyers have confidence in the apartments that they could potentially buy, because Sydney houses are so expensive, are we going to see the millennial generation become, in a sense, I call it Manhattanisation? They'll become like New Yorkers. They know it's too hard to buy a home unless they go a long way out. So if they don't want to go out, they're going to be apartments, not necessarily in the CBD, but there might be in areas like hubs, Parramatta.
Yeah, well, that one I was talking about, Oriole is the complex. It's 300 metres walk to the station.
Yeah.
So
That kind
that's
of
going to
development
work for people.
will do well.
That's going to work for people.
Yeah.
And I particularly know the builder there, and I know the quality there. So, and he's pretty distressed with what you're hearing with private certifiers.
It's hard for them to sell.
If you didn't have private certifiers, we would not have built as many apartments as we have, because if you try to do it the old way through councils, the process is incredibly hard.
That's right.
So
and they were real obstructionists, weren't they?
And they're building up the private certifiers, and so they should in some cases. But you know, at the end of the day, the city of Sydney is growing, and you've got to provide or have provisions for growth. And if you don't have the right people in place to get it done, it's not going to get done.
One last thing, mate, because I think the apartment issue, I guess we could actually quickly go. Melbourne apartment problem, is it dissipating as more and more people come in?
It is dissipating because Melbourne's one of those cities that people want to live in, same as Sydney. Brisbane's working hard to get people there, and they're starting to get that growth. So I suspect it won't be a problem in years to come, but there are still areas
Are
where
older
you can
people
buy.
downsizing? Like they sell their house in Redcliffe where they've got 4 or 5 rooms where all the kids were, and now their
Going to
kids,
apartments,
and then now their kids are working in the CBD, so they want an apartment overlooking a river. Is that kind of thing happening in Brisbane?
Generally, but they're buying good quality apartments, so they're not buying in the bulk areas. Yes,
like New Farm and places like that, which has done really well.
Very well. Very well.
All right, and so we're covered. Now, I
We
guess
didn't even talk about clearance rates, but they were fantastic. Again, this weekend just gone. Sydney in the 80s, Melbourne in the 70s, over 1,000 auctions for Melbourne. And at this time last year, the clearance rate across the country was around 42.7%. This weekend just gone, over 75%.
But are the prices ridiculous, or are they just sort of meeting reserve?
No, there's a lot of properties that are going over
Some
reserve.
ridiculous ones.
Yeah, again.
Okay, we'll have to watch that.
Scary.
Charles Tarby, great seeing you.
Thank you, Peter.
That's the founder of Century 21, or C21, Charles Tarby. Well, we're always trying to get a handle on what's going on with the property market. And today we're talking to Ben Kingsley from suburbgrowth.com.au and the Property Couch podcast. Ben, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Peter.
Well, the market has moved from oversupply problems to undersupply. How will this affect the market in coming months?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting 2020. I mean, we're well poised with a pent-up level of demand and limited stock on market at the moment. So I think next year is going to be a story of more growth. One market that I probably have a question mark over it is the medium and high density stuff, with all of the issues around obviously construction, security, safety, and the cladding and so forth. So that's probably the only question mark. But I think anything freestanding or townhouses right across the country is going to see some black ink rather than some red ink.
Yeah, do you think the supply problems are starting to get a little bit better, or are we still in a pretty well a crisis situation?
Well, I still think it's, the levels that we're seeing are down significantly. And traditionally what we would find after a correction in the market is we'd normally have ample supply, but we haven't seen that story play out. So we are in sort of a new territory, a new country. I'd like to think that, we're almost at the back end of the spring and summer selling season. So, come February, March, if we have a nice spike in the number of properties coming to market, that will hopefully see a more balanced market, and we don't get back to those FOMO conditions, those fear of missing out. We don't want to be there again, Peter.
Okay, let's go to the latest first home buyers deposit scheme that will enter in effect January and February. And for those people who don't know what it is, just give us a brief summary and tell us what you think the ramifications will be.
Yeah, so I think, look, it's not a big number. Let's start with the number. There's 10,000. Now, the government did tout that they'd look at sort of increasing that. So when you're thinking about it, 10,000 isn't a big number, and that's got to be spread right across the country. Now, depending on which state or territory you're based in, there's levels in regards to the valuation of the property, and there's also levels in regards to the income. So single income household earners, no greater than, I think it's 90,000, and then 120 for double household income families. So it really is catering for that entry level first home buyer, and I think it's a great initiative. I think it also supports initiatives like we're seeing in some states and territories where they're doing equity share schemes. I think they are excellent initiatives and will help at that lower end of the market, but I don't think it's going to be enough to push all markets up. And if you're thinking, wow, 10,000 investors coming into the market, 10,000 first home buyers coming into the market, it's not going to be instant. It's going to be gradual throughout the course of the year.
Okay, just in case someone isn't really across it, so you're saying that what the government's offering will only go to 10,000 borrowers in a year. Is that the first thing?
That's right.
And what is the actual offering for those first home buyers?
Good point. So effectively what it's doing is you can save 5% and then the government is going to guarantee the remaining deposit. So you're going to avoid mortgage insurance. Now, lender's mortgage insurance is a one-off cost that protects the lender against you as a risk as a borrower. So the government is going to guarantee you that. Now, we are seeing some of the banks asking for further clarifications. NAB's the only one that's come out and said that they'll support it this far, but we do think the other three big banks will get on board if they know what's good for them.
Yeah, okay. And so I guess the bottom line is that once the 10,000 borrowers have actually been exceeded, there will be no more until, I guess, the next budget makes allocation for if they like the scheme.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Peter. I think we won't hear from the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, until probably May in terms of any indications about. I think the level of demand will be really strong for it. So we hope it goes to the right type of entry-level buyer who's struggling to get into the market, single people, single mothers or single husband, fathers with single kids. That's the sort of the market that I'd really like to see this being the most effective use of it.
Some people who are natural worriers will say, if someone goes in with a 95% debt, if something goes wrong, negative equity is not a long way away. What do you reckon, mate?
Well, I think, we've gone through periods of negative equity. We saw the boom, come through the end of 2017, and there's still some people who might be experiencing negative equity. Now, the banks are pretty, I suppose, comfortable with the idea, as long as you continue to keep servicing your property, that they think that the value of those properties will move higher over time. So I don't think you'll start to see the banks calling in and being aggressive in that particular front. So I tend to think, property is a long-term play. First home buyers coming into the market, they're not trying to speculate on the marketplace. They want to basically buy their first home, get on the property ladder. So I'm not so worried about any negative equity risk.
Yeah, and I guess the bottom line is I think sometimes there's a lot made of negative equity. Let's face it, over in Perth, there are a lot of home owners over there who've retained their jobs, but they would have bought at the peak of the market, and that market fell about 25%, didn't it? So there's probably a whole bunch of people with negative equity over there. As long as they weren't trying to sell it and desperately trying to get what they outlaid, I guess life goes on, and eventually that old price will be surpassed, as you see in most housing cycles.
I agree, Peter. I think we've seen scaremongering from that negative. I mean, it's a good headline. We also saw it when we started to see APRA's market intervention around, all of these people are going to be trapped on these interest only, rolling over to principal and interest. And we're going to see potentially this glut of property that was going to hit the market in 2019, which never materialised. I mean, it's well spread out. We're seeing the mortgagee and possession sales in WA, although they're off their low bases, they still are so low that it's immaterial in terms of the impact in that particular market. And I think you'll also see Perth finally showing some green shoots next year in regards to property valuations as their economy and the mining sector picks up.
How should mum and dad investors play this new market that obviously is doing well? You can see the auction clearance rates are very high. So wherever they're having auctions, I presume lots of people are turning up and they're bidding. And we know that not all property markets are the same. Some wouldn't be doing as well as others. But with the first home buyers being given a lift as well, how do you think mum and dad investors should play the surge in the market likely in 2020?
Yeah, I think, again, we don't want to get to a stage of FOMO where we've got this fear of missing out and we'll play just any price for any property. We must do our research. We must, in my view, as an investor, you shouldn't be buying any more than, say, 10% above the median of the particular suburb. So we don't have any risk of, buying assets that are at the top end in the top 25% quartile. I would say for if you're buying below the median in a suburb and you're looking for a property that may be existing that has a bit of tidy up and some value add, those types of investors will be insulated. If you're looking for house and land packages or off the plan, that's the area of concern for me. So I would tread carefully. I'd do my research very well, and I'd make sure that I'm not in any risk of oversupply in those particular types of accommodation.
Okay. So what was the defining moment for property in 2019?
Oh, I think probably it was the federal election when we saw negative gearing and capital gains tax. I mean, there was a lot of fear. The marketplace definitely wouldn't have responded as well as it had after that. There's been sort of three defining moments really. APRA's easing of their monetary and macro prudential interference in the marketplace, and finally lower interest rates. I mean, it has been they've bought the buyers back, and hopefully that'll have a positive wealth effect, and we'll see the economy start to show some further signs of improvement into 2020.
Okay, get the crystal ball out. Tell us about 2020 and your property outlook.
Yeah, I think, again, coming back to our numbers, I think there'll be a lot of states and territories that'll be in positive growth. I'd like to think that some of the older unit market will see a bit of a spike. Sort of Brisbane's supply story is getting lower there, so hopefully a bit more demand coming into that market. So, I mean, more broadly speaking, I'm a little bullish on the market. I just want it to go a little bit more steadily than the sort of rapid numbers we're seeing. When I see numbers of 1.3, 1.4% gains inside a 1 month period, that tends to worry me. I mean, we're still 5 to 8% off the peaks of the market in both Sydney and Melbourne, but more broadly speaking, I think it's going to be a positive story for property in 2020.
Okay, finally, tell us about suburbgrowth.com.au.
Yeah, it's a fascinating product. It's been something that the Chief Engineer and Research Director, Jeremy Shepherd, has been working on for many, many years. He started the research back in 2010, and effectively it's a new type of product in the market. What actually happens is it predicts capital growth for the next 3 years out using a very clever algorithm measuring demand and supply. So a lot of people want to know what the value of their property is worth today, but what suburb growth can do at the suburb level for either houses or units. It can give a prediction, a forward prediction of capital growth over the next 1, 2 or 3 years.
Great stuff, mate. Thanks for joining us on the program.
Thanks, Peter.
That's Ben Kingsley from suburbgrowth.com.au and the Property Couch podcast. Well, that's the show for this week. I look forward to seeing you next week. And just a reminder, if you're someone who likes to invest in the stock market, we have our small and micro cap conference on Tuesday between 9 and 2 at City Tattersalls Club in Sydney. We'll have 9 or 10 CEOs from various companies. They'll pitch their business, they'll tell you what they do, they'll give you the outlook for the company, and you get a chance to ask them some questions. That's next Tuesday at CTATS in Sydney.